Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around retro football at the moment. My name is Suj.
And my name is James.
And today's Throwback Thursday. We're going to be looking back at the season 1996-97, and in particular, perhaps the story of Middlesbrough Football Club.
Definitely, particularly the story of Middlesbrough Football Club. In my opinion...
Wait, let me say it.
Go on.
Riverside. I know, just get it out early.
Yeah, we have goal news from the Riverside. This is one of the most unique individual Premier League football stories ever for a single season, in my opinion.
I get that, and I'm sure we're going to get into the ins and outs of why. I looked back at the season as you did in preparation for the pod and what have you. And I suppose the reason people say it was remarkable was because of the number of goals involved, because of the players they had on the pitch, because it ran side by side with some cup runs to the finals, yet ended up in relegation off the back of non-football related stuff. But ultimately, if you look at that season and really pick it apart, there's as much of an argument to say that they could have, should have gone down anyway.
Well, I don't know. I often joke with you a lot, don't I, Suj, about the West Ham 2002-03 team, about being the best team, that genuinely the best side that got relegated, and points would suggest, to go down on 42 points may never get matched. You were astonishingly unlucky that season. You and Bolton were producing Champions League form in like the last 2 months of that season, going head to head.
I mean, Middlesbrough's form in the last 2 months of this season was decent.
Well, the thing is, when you consider some of the players they had, it is remarkable that they went down. I mean, they dished out some hidings, mate, to teams. When they clicked, they were good to watch. If you ask the Middlesbrough fan, I'm pretty sure they would remember this team with more fondness than even the one that got to the UEFA Cup final in like 2005, was it? That Middlesbrough team from the mid-noughties was a good side. You could trust it. It could get away results. It had a solid base with sprinklings of good players. This though had a couple of genuine world-class footballers who, I mean, in Juninho and Ravanelli, if you'd have been picking a world 11 at the time, those two would have come into consideration.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. I mean, anybody that scores more than 30 goals in a season is a top striker, and Ravanelli picked up 31 that season. So yeah, he's up there. And Juninho scored 15 goals from midfield. And any midfielder that racks up 15 goals, like I haven't had a striker at West Ham that scored 15 goals for about 30 or 40 years. It's definitely 30 years. So having a midfielder chip in with another 15 goals is decent. They no doubt about it. And then you sprinkle in the likes of Emerson and maybe Fester and a few others.
The amazing uniqueness of this team as well is, in spite of having a couple of quality, real quality players, it was built up of almost like journeymen and a couple of local players. So, I mean, the equivalent now of Middlesbrough buying Ravanelli and Juninho. And Juninho had been bought a couple of years earlier. He was the one who kind of started it. And it was the real wow moment. Like, how have they got this amazing Brazilian kid that everybody was tracking? And, the equivalent of that now would be, Middlesbrough spending like 100 million on a footballer. A serious dosh in terms of the quality of player that they actually bought in.
Correct.
But But they had, people like Vickers and White and Curtis Fleming.
Let me ask you a question, James. And I'll be impressed if you get the answer. But you probably will, knowing you. Which, alongside Emerson and Juninho, played the most games that season in midfield for Middlesbrough? Which midfielder he was sat in between them the most number of games alongside them for Middlesbrough that year? Which midfielder?
Was it Robbie Mustoe?
Robbie Mustoe.
That's the point.
It's fantastic, isn't it? And you mentioned that it's the equivalent of 100 million being spent now by Middlesbrough on a player, right? I watched Premier League years. There was a wrap-up program. The entire transfer window of the summer before, when Ravanelli got bought, I know Juninho was a bit earlier, had the likes of Vialli, Patrick Berger, Alan Shearer made his move. I think it was Roberto Di Matteo came into the league. And there was a bunch of others. And yet the entire spending of the entire transfer window was £125 million. You had like names that I was like, oh, wow, okay. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer came into the league that year. There were some big name moves coming, big international players joining the league. The entire budget for the whole summer, 125 million, give or take.
Yeah, Spurs bought Ramon Vega.
Yeah.
Some.
Yeah. So I suppose, yeah, on paper they did have a good team. They did have a reasonable team, I would say. Yeah.
The story goes essentially. Obviously, Middlesbrough got moved into the Riverside and were promoted into the Premier League in 95-96. Had a very good, decent opening first season, and then in that summer decided to go a bit mental. They bought Emerson for $4 million, which wasn't short change at the time, from Porto, a player who, on his day, was extremely good, but would also go missing quite often. It was highly rumoured that he loved the Teesside nightlife as much as he loved the football. I think he was a bit of a social beast, as it goes. And Ravanelli, I think Ravanelli's remembered as going to Middlesbrough at like the end of his career. It's not the case. I think you remember it like that because of the white feather, because of the hair. Yeah. You think, well, he must have been so old. The summer before, Fabrizio Ravanelli scored Juventus's goal in the 1996 Champions League final against Juventus, a final that they would, against Ajax, a final that they would win. And then Middlesbrough have gone and bought him. They've gone and bought one of Juventus's, the European champions, front two for £7 million. He was 27.
Yeah.
He wasn't old. He was at his peak.
Yeah. And he proved it. He scored a lot of goals.
It was an astonishing signing. And so obviously the excitement for the new season is massive. They're selling out the ground every single week. Opening day of the season completely sums up what's to come. Behind 3 times against Liverpool, Ravanelli scores all 3 of Middlesbrough's goals and they draw 3-3. And the hype then for the midweek game at Chelsea was huge because you'd already mentioned some of the names. Obviously, Ruud Gullit was now in charge of Chelsea. They'd gone and got Vialli, Roberto Di Matteo, add in Ravanelli. There was quite an Italian flair to the fixture. Di Matteo scored the only goal. But it was really hyped up. People were seriously thinking that Middlesbrough were the real deal. Okay, so fine. So they've only got 1 point from the first 2. They then get a draw at Nottingham Forest, who would end up finishing bottom that season. Juninho got the goal. But then look at their next fixtures, mate. They beat you 4-1, West Ham. They beat Coventry 4-0. And then they won 2-1 at Everton to go 4th. And people were actually asking the question at that point if they could challenge for the title.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. The shock for me was as much a team that manages to get to 4th, 6 games into the season. This is a 38-game season, and then drop all the way down to the relegation zone and spend the majority of the second half of the season in the bottom 3, bar 2 or 3 weeks, was more of a surprise having done that for sure. But then they from that point on, they won 2 of their next 20 games, James.
Well, the best stat of all is that they won at Everton on the 14th of September to go 4th. They didn't win a league game again until they beat Everton again on Boxing Day. They beat Everton. Juninho got a couple to beat Everton 4-2 at the Riverside. And in between, there was some bleak league results. They lost 4-0 at Southampton. They lost 5-1 at Liverpool. Robbie Fowler got 4 of those. But every now and then, they'd have decent performances, like they drew 2-2 at home to Manchester United. They beat Newcastle, who obviously would go on to finish 2nd in the League Cup. They beat Liverpool also in the quarterfinals of the League Cup. And they weren't resting players in the League Cup. They were dishing out hidings. 10-0 against Hereford over 2 legs. 5-1 against Huddersfield. So when they clicked, they were scoring goals. And that was the real thing. And it kind of leads to the end of the story. Is when they were playing them League Cup ties, they weren't resting people. So everybody, when you think of Ravanelli that season, everyone kind of remembers that he scored 31 goals. Great total. 15 of them were in cup competitions, and obviously they weren't in Europe. He scored 15 goals in the League Cup and the FA Cup, and they played some shite teams along the way. Ravanelli actually only scored 4 more league goals than Juninho.
Okay.
Juninho was the absolute star of this team, and he was the one that really tried to pull them through. There's a video that I watched last night, which is basically their review of the season. I think it's on Middlesbrough's official YouTube channel, I think. The whole 2 hours of their season, every goal.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant watch. And it's a brilliant watch mainly because of Juninho. He was 5'5". There was nothing of him, but he'd get involved physically. And he was just always on the move. Always on the move. Everything was so fast-paced with everything that he did. He ended up finishing second to Gianfranco Zola, the Football Writers Player of the Year, which, that speaks volumes in itself, the fact that they've got relegated and he's ended up finishing second in the Player of the Year. I think PFA Player of the Year was Alan Shearer. There was another official Premier League Player of the Year award, which he won. So it shows how big his contribution was. But obviously, by the time they then beat Everton in that Boxing Day fixture, they're obviously in the bottom 3. They're in the shit. And a week or so earlier is where obviously the problem comes, because between 14th of December and 26th of December, they didn't play. And that's because in between that time, they should have played at Ewood Park against Blackburn Rovers.
Yeah.
And Middlesbrough requested for the game to be postponed.
Mm-hmm.
They were under the impression that the Premier League were going to agree to let them postpone the game. The Premier League decided on the Friday that they were not going to let Middlesbrough postpone the game. Middlesbrough then took it upon themselves to make the decision to say, we're not going to go and play. They thought that the worst that would happen to them was they would get a big fine.
And Blackburn get a default 3-0 victory or whatever, and that's it.
No, I don't think it was a case of just giving them the default 3-0. I think it was a case they thought it would be a fine. I mean, there'd been cases previously. We spoke on this podcast last Thursday about, obviously, Sugar got the points back for Tottenham with the point deductions from financial stuff in the 80s. So Middlesbrough weren't saying... Middlesbrough were trying to postpone the game, basically. They reckon, I think it's a slightly exaggerated number, they had 23 players unavailable through illness. There was about 10 that were injured, and the rest there was then a virus that spread through the first team squad. Obviously, in hindsight, and plenty ex-players, I think Brian Robson, who was manager at the time, even said this himself, that if he could go back and do it again, he would have just taken the youth team and taken whatever beating that they'd been given. Because in the end, the 3-point deduction is what cut them off. It's actually essentially what relegated them.
Yeah, I mean, there were some other teams in the league that season that had particularly bad seasons, the likes of Coventry and what have you. Sunderland were not very good either. Now, they did score a lot of goals and they did win quite a few games, and I'll buy that. But looking at their cup runs, right? Just take their cup runs, for example. You are unlikely to get a cup run as easy as their cup runs get. Like FA Cup, right? Chester, Hednesford Town. All right, then they have Man City. Then they've got Derby, Chesterfield in the semi-final, all the way to like they've played who? Man City in 1997 are not the Man City of today. And
no,
then you look
they
at
weren't even top flight. It was second division.
Exactly. So you look at the League Cup. Hereford, Huddersfield, Newcastle, then admittedly Liverpool. So Newcastle and Liverpool were a little tougher, but then Stockport in the semis and then Leicester in the finals. They didn't have like massively difficult cup runs, in my opinion.
No, that's fair. They still beat in the League Cup. They still beat Newcastle and then Liverpool in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, that was a little tougher.
Newcastle and Liverpool going into the final week of the season still could mathematically win the Premier League. So they were two big sides, mate. The hardest one in the FA Cup, granted, was Derby County in the quarterfinal. Was the toughest tie.
And they did score a lot of goals. They conceded a lot of goals. I mean, the end of the season on a goal difference of -9. So I understood the romance of why they did particularly well. I had a look at the individual fixtures. In an average season, James, say 38-game season, how many games would you expect Spurs not to score in, to blank?
Not to score in at all.
Yeah, out of 38 games.
4 or 5.
So these guys blanked in 16 out of 38 games.
Yeah.
That's a lot of blanks in amongst it. In the run from the Everton fixture that in September that you mentioned, that 20-game run where they only won 2 games in 20, and that's what got them from 4th to bottom, basically, and that was that. They scored 15 goals in those 20 games. 8 of them came in 2 games, which they won against Everton and Sheffield Wednesday. And then the other 7 was spread amongst another 18 games. They won 4 games with scoring 4 goals. They got a 6 in there as well. They got a couple of 3s. There were just a lot of zeros in there, James. And I think that was ultimately the 6s and the 4s, I think, are glossing over a lot of bad days where they just didn't score.
Oh, I'm not in question of that. I mean, as well as saying, obviously, the Blackburn, the match that was postponed, obviously really cost them. There are defeats in there which, 1-0 at home to Southampton, and one that I'd forgotten about very late on. They lost at home to Sunderland in April. And if they won that game, because, Sunderland went down as well, but finished a place above Middlesbrough, that would have made a huge difference in terms of momentum, them going into that final run of games, actually being outside of it rather than in it and needing the points to get out, basically. So, yeah, they had some comically bad results. They failed to score against Spurs at the most average season in the history of Tottenham Hotspur. We went there and won 3-0 quite early in the season. Teddy Sheringham scored twice. And then we played them very late on. And I remember going to that game and thinking, well, they'll definitely beat us tonight because they need to. And it didn't really turn up. We scored a scrappy goal for Andy Sinton and beat them 1-0. So they had plenty of shit results in there. There's no doubt in that. But other times, they showed what they are capable. You mentioned those 4-2s against Everton and Sheffield Wednesday. In the Sheffield Wednesday fixture in mid-January, Ravanelli was sent off. I think at either 2-1 or 2-2. It was Gianluca Festa's debut. He'd been brought in for a sizable sum as well, 2.7 million, scored on his debut. Juninho was fantastic, and it showed what they were capable of. But then the following week, following Sheffield Wednesday, you mentioned Hednesford. So Hednesford Town might be a name that nobody's ever heard of. They were what would now be a National League side. I did mean to research what's happened to them because they've just fallen off the non-league pyramid a little bit, I think. But they were a half-decent National League side at the time. Hednesford drew Middlesbrough in the 4th round. They switched it to the Riverside, which was a more common thing there, where you'd get a non-league side would switch it to the stadium of the
You're going to make more money. And
exactly, yeah. Now they'd keep it at Hednesford and take the TV money, most likely. But then it wasn't selected for TV. They moved it to the Riverside. And Middlesbrough laboured. Middlesbrough beat them 3-2. They went behind. They really struggled. They didn't go in front in the game till quite late on. So it showed they could go from one extreme to the other. The following week, here's a goal. If there's one goal from that season, go and look at this because I couldn't remember it. But I haven't seen it last night. It's a worldie. A goal, I think Beck got it in the draw at Wimbledon. And if any goal would sum up Juninho, he does a flick, a trick, pulls it out the sky, plays about 3 1-2s, and then rolls it on a plate for Beck to get them a draw at Selhurst Park against at Wimbledon. Then they win at Man City in the Cup 5th round, which wasn't a big deal at the time because City had gone down the previous season. Then they lose to Newcastle. Then, as you mentioned, easier cup ties again. Semi-final of the Cup, Stockport County. And I know you're thinking, Stockport County, they beat West Ham in the quarter-final. Remember Ian Dowie's own goal?
No. Thank you.
I've told you about this before. That was the quarter-final of that season. Middlesbrough win the first leg 2-0. They lose the second leg 1-0 and grimly hold on to get to what is obviously historically their first ever League Cup final. There's bad league results other side. They lose at home to Newcastle. They lose at Sheffield Wednesday. Then they show what they're capable of again. They smashed Derby 6-1. Now, Derby were a mid-table side that season.
Yep.
They ripped them apart, scoring 5 goals in about half hour in the second half. Ravanelli scored a hat-trick. And then they played that same derby in the FA Cup quarter-final at the baseball ground that weekend. Juninho and Ravanelli score again. They win 2-0, and then they're in the semis of that competition as well. And it's at this point, around about that period, they had a great run. So if you look at their league results then, they beat Derby 6-1. They won 3-1 at Filbert Street against Leicester City. They were 3-0 up at half-time. They should have been about 6-0 up at half-time. Then they beat Blackburn 2-1. Then Juninho scored a brilliant headed goal, a rare one, in a win over Chelsea. But then from then on, and the Chelsea win was the 22nd of March, they only won one more league game.
The defeats at Sunderland, defeats at Spurs. Again, tight 1-0s. 3-2 at Villa they won, which was good. Draw against Manchester United, draw against Blackburn, and a draw against Leeds. All 0 or 1 goals between them. So they did tighten up towards the back end of the season, but it just wasn't meant to be. Ultimately, that season, if you look at it, there were 7 teams that could have gone down. I suppose if you factor in goal difference, maybe not so. So Middlesbrough finished on 39 points and went down. That's including the deduction, right, of 3 points. But then you had above them Coventry. I'm just pulling up the table here. So Sunderland, 40 points. Coventry, 41. Southampton, 41. Everton, 42. West Ham, 42. Blackburn, 42. So 7 teams within a 3-point hula hoop or whatever you want to call it. Had they not had those 3 points deducted, they would have finished 14th. Now, 14th, if you offered me 14th for West Ham today, I'll take it. 14th's all right, right? If you've been in a relegation scrap, that's a big jump from 19th and down and out.
And so that's the point. If you give them 3 points back deducted from the Blackburn game, they would have finished on that total of 42, that same number as yourselves in 2002, 2003. And so perhaps then the argument is that this is the best team that ever got relegated.
I suppose so. I think, you know what I'm interested in is how did so many teams, and that list that I just went through is Blackburn, West Ham, Everton, Southampton, all have such horrid seasons to end the year all on 42 or 41 points? Because you wouldn't expect all of those teams to be in and around that.
But they're not so, when you think about it, because that kind of point total now will have you safe, really, with sort of 4 or 5 games to go. What's massively different from this era to that era is the total of the teams at the top of the leagues, right?
Yeah, true. I'm just looking at that now.
Would Man United win the league on 80 or something?
No, much less. 75, James. And then it drops down to 68 for Newcastle and Arsenal.
That 75 is probably the lowest, I think, of a Premier League title winner from that season.
What did Leicester pick up?
81.
Okay, so even that's a bit more. Then it drops off to like 59. Chelsea in 6th place, 59 points, and then 57.
What was the points for 4th that season?
4th was Liverpool, 68 points.
Yeah, the lowest ever for 4th is 62 points.
Wow.
But yeah, so I mean, the league was a lot more condensed then, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Used to say back in the day you could afford to lose six games. You lose more than 6 games, you weren't going to win the league. I think now Manchester City or Liverpool would lose 3 and start shitting themselves.
Yeah.
That's the reality. So, you know, there's a lot less draws now to what there was then. So, you know, every year we hear about it in the Premier League, don't we? That mythical 40-point total. It's never really needed to be that since that season with yourselves, which is, it's coming up to nearly 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Really, 37, 38 is probably going to have you safe in most Premier League seasons now. What killed them in terms of the running was the cup runs. Now, what we've obviously mentioned that the League Cup final up to the semi-final. What you have to remember is they played Martin O'Neill's Leicester City in the final in mid-March at Wembley. It's the club's first ever domestic cup final. And although they're in the bottom 3 and Leicester are mid-table, Middlesbrough go in as favourites. Partly because the form they've started to show, and they destroyed Leicester only like a couple of weeks earlier at Filbert Street. What was the date of the final? April the 6th. The league fixture at Filbert Street was March the 15th. So it's only a couple of weeks later. They'd already destroyed them once. And Middlesbrough had the firepower. But Leicester had good players, didn't they? Is it Lennon, Heskey, Steve Walsh at the back. you knew when you played a Martin O'Neill team, you were going to have a football match. Like, they weren't going to roll over in front of you. They were the sort of side, they were awful to play against because they just never give up. You knew they were going to give 100% every week. And Emil Heskey's 118th minute equaliser in extra time, I think summed up that Leicester team. You know, second balls, ball out wide, cross in, off the bar, rebound. It trickles in after Ravanelli had given them the lead 4 minutes into extra time. Middlesbrough probably should have won that final in 90 minutes. And obviously, they went on to lose the replay at Hillsborough with the Steve Claridge goal also in extra time. That was 10 days later. Now, the thing is, if you go back to the final of the League Cup, this is where they killed themselves, is because the amount of football they had to play in 6 weeks was brutal. The knock-on of the Blackburn postponement and obviously other postponements because they got to both domestic cup finals. Thank heavens they weren't in Europe. God knows then what would have happened. I have no idea. So they played Leicester. The final against Leicester was on the 6th. 3 days later, they go to you and draw. 4 days after that, they've got Chesterfield at Old Trafford in one of, if not the best FA Cup semi-finals of all time. Chesterfield were a third-tier side. Middlesbrough had a red card in the first half, and Chesterfield managed to go 2-0 up. Sean Dyche, now manager of Burnley, scored the Chesterfield's second penalty.
Okay.
Just drove it through the middle. Basically, no one wanted to take it, so the captain went, I'll just take it and smash it. Middlesbrough pull a goal back, and then famously, Chesterfield scored again. It went over the line, but no VAR, goal not given. Middlesbrough draw level. Then they go in front at extra time, and then Hewitt scores in the last minute of extra time dramatically to get Chesterfield a replay that I think they knew that they couldn't win against 11 men, Middlesbrough.
No.
But obviously something that they could take with them forever. So straight after Chesterfield, 3 days later, is the League Cup final. So they've gone from extra time against Old Trafford, against Chesterfield, to extra time again against Leicester in the final replay, having done extra time the week earlier as well. 3 days later, they lose that Sunderland fixture. 3 days after that, they got the Chesterfield replay. 2 days later, and this is what I couldn't remember, they played at Tottenham on the Thursday night. And then you think, there's a nice long break. The only reason it was a break was because it was international football. England beat Georgia at Wembley. Shearer and Sheringham scored. And then they come straight back into a mental running. May the 3rd, the Saturday, they play Aston Villa at home. It's must win. They go 2-0 up. Monday. They're playing quite well. They blow the lead. They get a penalty in the last minute. Ravanelli scores to win them the game. On the Monday, they play at Manchester United, the bank holiday Monday of May. Roughly this time of year, isn't it? Mm-hmm. What would have been our now bank holiday if it had been a Monday? And Manchester United still need points to win the title. They tear United a new one, mate. Inside about 30 or 35 minutes, they're 3-1 up at Old Trafford. They're pissing all over United, the team that's going to win the league. And this is in spite of Ravanelli going off injured with a hamstring injury as well, which is important to the story. Gary Neville scores his first goal for United. Solskjaer equalises in the second half. It's a creditable draw, but they probably should have won that game at Old Trafford. And they played some beautiful football. 3 days later comes the rearranged game against Blackburn, 3 days before the end of the season. If they win the game, they'd actually go level on points with Blackburn. A point for Blackburn puts them safe. Juninho gets brought down for a clear penalty, doesn't get given. Game finishes 0-0. They have to go to Ellen Road on the final day of the season and win to stay up. They can only manage a 1-1 draw. Juninho equalised, famously on the pitch, crying afterwards. And you're looking at it, and it's still, I think anybody who's watched back in Premier League years goes, sorry, how did they get relegated again? And it was like that, but they killed themselves on the fixtures. They must have been absolutely shattered.
I mean, 4 games in the last 8 days of the season is insane. 4 games in 8 days to wrap up the season, followed 6 days later by the cup final, is insane.
Well, not even just that. If you go back to the period from the league, April. The first League Cup final, up to the Tottenham fixture, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fixtures in 18 days?
You're going from the 13th to the 24th. No,
6th to the 24th.
6th to the 24th. So yeah.
I mean, it's madness. And they had, how many games went to extra time and that? Like 3 games that went to extra time in that period. They were a shattered team, but one person who was never tired was little Juninho, who just kept trying to drag them on every week. And he was voted as Middlesbrough's greatest ever player. And I should think, ask people again in 100 years, they'll still be saying Juninho, I would have thought. Brilliant little player. And obviously, they've still got the caveat of FA Cup final against Chelsea the following week. Can they salvage something from this wreckage of a football season? Surely these poor bastards aren't going to lose both domestic cup finals and get relegated in the same season.
I think having never been to a cup final before, right?
Correct.
First season, like buses, they come 2 at once.
So the main thing in the story in the build-up to the week was that Ravanelli was injured. And Ravanelli basically, on the day of the final, refused to take a fitness test. Ravanelli started. He lasted about half hour. Middlesbrough were mentally not in the right place. There was an article in 442 a few years ago with a few of the players who said that was a massive punch-up between Ravanelli and Neil Cox, fullback, on the day before the game. Basically, because Cox had said into one of the tabloid papers that Ravanelli wasn't fit and shouldn't play.
Right.
Ravanelli was trying to hide the injury, and he knew that it was going to be a big call for Robson to leave him out on the day. He was banking on the fact that, on reputation, Robson would have to pick him to save the season, right? Ravanelli wasn't fit. He had a hamstring injury. He was injured for 2 weeks, right? We know hamstring injuries, right? How many people are going to recover properly in 2 weeks, right?
You get scared of sprinting, basically.
Well, he went off on the stretcher at Old Trafford on May the 5th. The final was 12 days later. He was in no position to be playing the game, right? Mind you, it was already done for Middlesbrough long before that, because basically the players reckon they went on the pitch and their headspace was like, where's Ravanelli at and stuff like that. And obviously Chelsea score after like 45 seconds. Di Matteo scores a worldie. Eddie Newton scored the second in the second half after a great backheel from a cross from Zola. And Chelsea won quite straightforward in the end. I think Middlesbrough mentally were done for that final because of what was happening off the pitch with Ravanelli. And then what were they going to do without him as well was the flip side. They did need him to try and win the game, right? This was a goal-scoring monster at the time. And so, the season finished empty-handed. Juninho went very nearly to Tottenham by all reports, but Atletico Madrid put up more money. It was rumours that apparently he really, really didn't want to play for another Premier League team as well, such that he'd fallen in love with Middlesbrough. Remarkably.
Of all the places in the world.
Yeah, this little brilliant Brazilian kid has fallen in love with Middlesbrough, but he obviously did.
But so did Emerson. Loved the nightlife. Maybe
Middlesbrough. I can't imagine the nightlife in Teesside.
Maybe there's something in the beer up there or something that's getting these Brazilian lads super happy.
Maybe so, but Juninho obviously was true to his word. He came back twice more, right? He suffered a broken leg when he went to Atletico Madrid and wasn't quite the same player, but he was still part of Brazil's winning 2002 World Cup squad. Probably for his legacy, it might have actually been better had he not come back. But he still did very well in his second spell. I think the third spell, people were a bit like he's lost his legs a little bit here. He was
scored 11 goals in 35 in his third spell. It's decent. 1 in 3.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in that first spell, like I said, he scored 12 league goals. It was only 4 league goals less than Ravanelli. I think people forget that. And he scored important goals as well, Juninho. None more so than that header in the game against Chelsea that I mentioned, which is another brilliant goal that you need to go and check out. But yes, the moral of the story is, if all your players are out injured and sick, just play the youth team. Do you think if it happened now, they'd get deducted the points?
No.
I don't either.
I think there's so many things that have happened that could have potentially warranted points deductions. I think points deductions now are going to be really severe. Like what happened with West Ham, Tevez and Mascherano, that could easily have been a points deduction type offence, and they steered away from it. I just think that they will try and steer away from it because of the financial implications now. Getting relegated from the Premier League is worth however many millions in lost revenue. and then they'll take it to court, long it out, appeal it. Before you know it, 6 months later, and say the Court of Appeals says actually no, you can stay in the Premier League. Then what? Do you claw back all the money? I just think it's going to be very. It's got to be very, very black and white and hard to refute before they'll do a points deduction based punishment. Now, I really think so.
The only comparable case that we know of, and we'll do a happier West Ham memory here, is obviously Lasagna Gate. In 2006 in the final day at Upton Park when Tottenham woke up with the shits, right? So Tottenham wanted to get the game postponed.
Everyone had been to Chick King the night before.
No, it definitely wasn't Chick King. not that their fitness levels would have been any good eating that either, by the way. But Tottenham obviously wanted to get the game postponed, but it was last day of the season, right? But I think the stories afterwards were like, if it wasn't game 38 and everyone playing at the same time, the Premier League would have let them call it off. Spurs even tried they tried everything, didn't they? They said, can we go back to 5 o'clock? Can we get 2 more hours? Anything. Can you move like the Arsenal game back to 5 o'clock as well? Problem was, like in terms of the one London fixture, you probably could have got away with moving West Ham Tottenham back 2 hours on the day. From a transport perspective, it's all right for everyone, isn't it? What about the Wigan fans who'd gone to Arsenal? All 10, right? Yeah. So they couldn't move the kickoff times or anything.
No.
So yeah, Spurs played with the shits. But I think had that, and that would have been 9 years later. I think if it had not been the last game, I think they would have got the permission to call the game off. And I think if it happened now, similarly, I mean, probably inappropriate at times of talking about viruses and stuff like that.
But player safety is a real big issue now, and I think
is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
Well, depends. Let's see what happens next week.
We're going to go back and play football, aren't we? It looks like.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to think with the Bundesliga and whatnot.
That feels like a perfect segue, James, into promoting Monday's podcast.
Monday's podcast, I suggest, is going to be very, very important. I think by Monday we'll know.
Be the biggest podcast of the season. So there we go, James. A nice little wrap up of Middlesbrough 96-97. Interesting season. A lot of highs, a lot of lows. Let's call it a roller coaster because that's
just
what it
one
was.
more thing finally to say, just to give it a happy ending story a little bit. Is obviously Middlesbrough did come up the next season and they got to the League Cup final again and lost to Chelsea. And they did obviously win their only trophy in 2004 and Juninho was part of that team. So Juninho did get a medal in the end 7 years later. Yeah,
and that is a happy ending. You are right. We've got left, a couple of bits and pieces this week. James will be streaming tomorrow. Ask James. I think it might become a bit of a Champ Man takeover. So do jump onto that. What time are you thinking tomorrow? 2:30?
1 o'clock-ish we'll aim for.
Yeah. And on Saturday, it's game week 12 now of Fantasy Champ Man. If you are playing and you don't know about James's live streams and you've been under a rock somewhere, or you don't speak English, because that's the only reason not to want to jump on.
Did you see what happened last night?
Yeah, I was on the whole stream the whole time.
When the wife brought Harry in?
Yeah.
And then Henri got sent off straight away.
So, because there was a few times in the second half particularly where you were asking me if I was in the chat, get Suj in the chat, right? So I have the stream on my phone going and I have a little small headphone in my ear. And then I'm watching Prison Break with the missus. So I'm watching the TV, but I'm actually listening to you. But I don't want to, go over and start like messaging away. So I do jump in when I can. And yesterday ended up being quite a good. It was a really good stream. Obviously, Harry comes in, you say goodnight, Henri gets sent off.
It's brilliant.
Classic. You can't write that stuff. Very, very interesting game week yesterday. I hear from Twitter and I see that had I played Hart, I would have had the highest. I would have been team of the game week.
That's correct. Yeah.
But I take it with a pinch of salt because I wouldn't have played. I would have benched Risa to play Hart. And Risa got me 10 points, so it wouldn't really have worked out quite like that. But I'm marching upwards, 60 points without having to take a hit. So let's keep it going. Every week that I get more than you, I'm gonna just take that as a victory.
You can take the W on this one.
Sorry,
you got to be down with the kids' days, didn't you? Take the dub.
Is that how they say it?
Take the dub, yeah.
I'll add the game week. I'll add the game week 11 to. I'll probably beat you 1 or 2 other game weeks. I had a 72 early in the season. I think I did all right there. So that's Saturday. James's live stream. Do jump on that because that'll be really good as well. The government, obviously, we're expecting Boris to announce lockdown release rules on Sunday. The FA and Premier League and all of that are having meetings imminently. So do stay tuned on Monday for the main Planet FPL podcast, because we may have, touch wood, fingers crossed, and all of the other things you can do to get good luck, news. We may have news about what's happening with football, at which point we'll be able to get into a little bit more detail. So looking forward to that and actually having an in-depth conversation about that.
Oh, I look forward to it.
Anything else to add, James?
Nah, enjoyed that.
Good. Well, make sure you hit like, subscribe, notification bells, share the podcast, all of that stuff that you're supposed to do. But most importantly, stay safe. Ciao for now.
Be nice to each other. Cue music, man.
Oh, one last thing, James. I've got a case of beer nuts coming on Monday for the pod. Happy days.